Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Each week, we hear real time stories from athletes and CEOs on how to maximize performance through an endurance mindset. Let's get started. Welcome to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. I'm your host, Greg McDonough. Today's guest is someone who's dedicated his career to improving education outcomes for all students. He's a seasoned leader in education technology with expertise blending business strategies with educational insights to drive long-term sustainable growth. He was recently named the EdTech Chronicle 2023 Best C-Level Officer in Education EdTech. And in 2023, EdTech Digest named him a top 100 influencer in EdTech. Please welcome the CEO of TinkRworks, Chad Stevens. Welcome, Chad.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you on the show. And I know we've got a lot of things we can uncover. So I'm going to jump into my favorite question. And Chad, tell me how your endurance mindset has impacted your life unexpectedly.
Unexpectedly. I think I think thinking about this question, I think one of the things that, being an endurance athlete, and I guess just to be fair, a retired endurance athlete at this point for about 12 years, I think, especially what Ironman and completing an Ironman taught me was it's really kind of more about the journey than the destination. I think, you kind of, for me, the journey was kind of like a 5-year journey. And in a lot of ways, I would almost give up, maybe not give up because it's such a unique experience to say you've done that. But that consistency that happened over those 5 years is really like the lesson I took away from it, and the ability to kind of apply that consistency over time, I think is really what, creates success, not just in fitness, but, in relationships and work and everything else. So that's, I guess that's kind of my surprise when I thought about that.
Yeah, you're spot on around consistency. And Chad, I'd love to go in a little bit deeper in specific in that 5-year training cycle. Give us some illustrations or some stories of when you woke up one morning and you just didn't want to do it, didn't want to get the training in, and what motivated you to stay consistent?
Gosh, I mean, I think, for me, my journey in endurance sports was really kind of a more of a health story, right? So, when I signed up for my first triathlon, I don't remember if I told you this when we talked before. I was just coming out of being a principal. I'd been a chief technology officer of a large school district. And quite frankly, had gotten pretty sedentary. I was a college baseball player. I was almost 300 pounds. And I just signed up for, I think it was 3 sprint triathlons. I paid in full. I didn't even have a bike. I didn't have anything training wise. My brother had done a race that I'd gone to watch. In fact, my first one was an open water swim, and I wasn't even really a good swimmer. I was just like, well, this is like a sink or swim moment in life, right? Like, kind of like you're either going to get in shape and figure this out and be able to swim in Galveston Bay in Texas, or drown. and so, but yeah, I mean, I think for me, I was seeing consistent results, right? And so, like, when you're really consistent over time, you're seeing good results. And especially when you start off and you're really in a bad spot, and you kind of let yourself get into that spot at the beginning, you're seeing those results at a much faster rate, right? And then you kind of get into this world where like you said, you get up and you're like, you have to do this. And I think over time, when you're, and I think you said you're training for another Ironman, right? You also start to realize, like, if what happens if you don't? It's a very painful. You get more experience, like coming into a race unprepared, whether it's an Ironman or even a sprint, is typically, makes your day a lot less enjoyable. So for me, it was just really like, knowing that you had to do that, and had a really good coach. I think we talked a little bit about. I was one of the early adopters of TriDot back when it was like an Excel spreadsheet, and you know, um, there was a lot of metrics associated with what was happening to you, even though they were a little bit binary at the time and not like that system is today. That kind of drove you, to consistency with your coach and your accountability and things like that.
You brought up an interesting point about data, and I find a conversation out in the marketplace between kind of being driven by data and statistics or be driven by feel. Any insights you have on that and on your journey?
Yeah, I think, absolutely. I think there's a lot of stuff in the business world and even in the education world where they talk about data driven decision making, right? Like that's like a thing. And, there's always been the Demings of the world that, I think with the great quote, without data, you're just another person with an opinion, type of stuff. Right. But like, I've always felt like that you should have data informed decisions. So the reality is you're in business and endurance and in many, many things. You're probably never going to have all the data you need to make a decision. And in fact, if you waited until you had all the data to make the decision, the business opportunity passed you by, the strategic decision that you had to make during a race that might have, helped you with nutrition or something like that also probably passed you by. So, that's the way I approach it. And I think depending on the maturity of the business or of what you're doing, you mean a lot of different things. And so like I worked at Amazon Web Services for 5 years. And, one of the things they talk about at Amazon a lot is, bias for action, and that most decisions are reversible, and that speed's kind of the most important thing, right? Because, you're not going to know if it worked or not until after, until you make the decision. And so like, I think that's the way I would approach that question. So.
Yeah, that's a really insightful way, because it is true, right? There's very few decisions we make that are black and white, right? You could buy the house you shouldn't buy, but then sell it for a loss or have some sort of recourse. It might not be an ideal outcome, but at the end of the day, it's not life or death.
Yeah.
Chad, so why triathlon? When you're making that decision, you're coming out being a principal, you're not at your fighting weight that you want to be at, having a college career in baseball. What was there an event that sort of sparked the interest, and then why triathlon?
So one, my brother got into it a little bit before me, my younger brother, and I went and watched a race, watched him do it. And I was, and this was like, gosh, 2007 ish, 2000, so like, I think triathlon was pretty popular, but it wasn't like it is, like it had, has gotten to, or, where it's at. I'm a little bit out of it now. I think it was a couple things. I think one, where I was living at the time in south of Houston, there was a great like triathlon community. There was a lot of people to train with. There was people that were starting to be in my friend circle that did triathlon. Obviously, my brother was doing it. So, but I also really like the balance of it. It felt like, you could play off of different parts of your strength. Like, so for me, it was like, not a big fan of running. I was definitely a Clydesdale. So running was not my thing. I really didn't even know how to, I knew how to swim, right? But I didn't know how to swim. So I had to teach myself how to do that. And, I was always a pretty, bigger guy. So, pretty decent on cycling, but I felt like to me, it was just like a good balance. And at the time, my train of thought was, cardio would help you pull down, some of that weight I had, which is true. I lost 50, 60 pounds, like right, pretty fast. And so that was really what kind of drew me to it. But I think the biggest thing probably was community. We had a really good community and a really cool team down there that was fun to ride with. And in fact, really I live outside of Chicago now, and really probably the main reason why I stopped doing it, other than it's a lot colder here, different parts of the year to do triathlon, was just the community. Like you kind of lost your community, lost your training partners, and it kind of just fell by the wayside. And you're managing a new job in a new city, and you kind of went on your way. So
Yeah, the community aspect of it is so important. And, I do a lot of my long rides by myself, and that's kind of how you race. And so it kind of makes sense. But you do find yourself not really pushing when you should be pushing, or not do it becomes a lazy sort of bike ride at times. Yeah, I get the miles in and I get the time in, but am I really improving? Is sort of and I think if I was into more group rides, I'd be pushed to go a little bit faster and further.
and you know who those really fast people are in those groups on those long rides on the Saturdays, and you can kind of test yourself. Can you really stay on those in that group, or do you need to fall back to another group? And it's a really nice kind of measuring stick. And when you're doing 100 miles on a weekend, I mean, you got to do a lot of different paces, right? Like, so it was always nice having a group. And then, the other thing that was great about it was you also had people that were maybe in a more rest cycle, right? That would support the rides. Like, we're dropping a cooler of water 50 miles down the road somewhere and driving it over there, and putting it on a fence post so we knew where we could stop and refuel our water bottles. Like all that just makes this thing a lot easier to manage.
Yeah, I was training for Wisconsin last year, and I had, I guess, 2 back-to-back Century training rides, and the second one I decided to jump into this bike club locally, and they were training for a Century that they were putting on a month or so ahead of time, and, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I could stay with this 15, 16 mile an hour group. It's not gonna be a problem." And mile 60, and there's a lot of climbing, like mile 60, I was done and so far back from the back, they just didn't know what to do, and ultimately bailed out on the ride, sent the organizer a text message, called an Uber, and waited for 45 minutes for an Uber to take me back to my car. It was so humbling.
Yeah.
So, Chad, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. Jumping into business, you mentioned consistency at the beginning of the show. How has that consistency that you learned with your training played itself in your business life?
I think, I guess to me, it's kind of, you think about, you know, process and kind of inputs. And I think when you're in business, you tend to think toward what the ultimate output is, right? Like, revenue, or your EBITDA, or, whatever that number is that the board's looking for. But like, what really matters is being really consistent on what you can control, the inputs that you can control in the business, right? So like, I'm 7 weeks into a new CEO role, and one of the things we're really working on is increasing our pipeline. Well, increasing pipeline is really a series of inputs and experiments to see what works to increase that you can control. You really can't control whether or not somebody buys something. Growing business would be really easy if you could control that, but you can't. And so similarly, you can do the run, you can do the swim, you can do the bike, or whatever, the go lift weights, which I'm more into now. And that's the input. You can control that. You can control that you showed up. You did this many reps to some extent. And in some ways, you don't always even control the outcome of that. But it's just that, but consistency over time, I think, is a really big deal. Um, I guess it was several months ago, I was listening to a podcast, another podcast, and I believe it was the Mark Manson podcast, and they said, I think people would be surprised at being less ambitious for longer periods of time, what they would accomplish. And it really like hit me between the eyes. Like, and I think this is where I struggle a little bit, just my personality when it comes to like, being a former endurance athlete. Like really, like if I left this podcast and decided that I was going to go walk for an hour this afternoon, that's better than, you know, going to sit down after work on the couch. And if you went and walked every day for a year, for me, I would be like, well, that was just kind of weak. I wasn't doing anything big races and nobody gave me a medal. but at the end of the day, if you do that, and I think it's very similar in business. Like if once you learn what's working to our point about failure and you kind of start, you see what's working. If you just apply those principles consistently over time, you'd be surprised probably what the results would be versus changing what you're doing all the time. So that's the way I would think about that.
What's coming to mind is, how does that play itself in a team dynamic? So if you're having a conversation with a teammate or you're leading a team,
Yep.
does that consistency message come out as well, or is it framed differently?
Yeah, I think it's just yeah. I mean, I think it's coaching, right? Like that whole concept. I mean, you could go back to take like Nick Saban always talked about, with his football teams, like the process, the process. It's just the process. Next play, next thing. I've watched a lot of his stuff, and I think that's the way I would think about it with the team. It's more like, hey, once we know this process exists that works, how do we kind of rinse and repeat that process across another, part of the country? And in my world of supporting schools, it's a really interesting market on the business side that a lot of people you know don't understand, I guess, when you think about it. And so I do think that applying those consistencies over time, and just coaching the team to do that, eventually they'll see results, and then that'll follow up, and then they'll start to put it into place. I think the hard part is, like, typically when you start something new, you don't see results at first. It's just like training, right? So, I think, this is the old adage of, I'm going to go out and I'm going to run a 5K. Well, the first few weeks, you're just banged up sore if you haven't done it. And you're you live in this, like, uh, kind of this disappointment. You think that the line, or take weight loss, you think the line's going to go straight like this, and the line goes like this. And somewhere when that line is going, like this, and you're like that, you're pretty disappointed, right? And so you're just like, "Ah, screw it. I'm just gonna go do something else." And I think that's similarly with the team. They've just got to see the results as you're coaching through it, and then you go from there.
So talk to us about what TinkRworks does. Give us a little insight on the business that you're now week 7 into.
Yeah, I know everything about it now. So no, it's a great product, right? So TinkRworks is a STEAM. So if you're familiar with that term of science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. So what we do is we in K through 8, so really focused at that elementary kind of middle school level. We have projects that schools buy either for STEM clubs after school or for their part of their curriculum that are that the students build. Some are reusable and some are like take home that kind of have all these elements. So then kind of help kids learn about problem solving, help kids learn how to fail, help kids learn how to make mistakes, help kids learn how to express themselves. And we really have you know all sorts of projects. Like, I think a lot of people, when they think about, you automatically go to robots, right? So like STEM robots, you think Amazon warehouse, all this stuff. But we have projects like one of my favorite ones is called Pampered Plant. It's for kids like in second, third grade. It's building a sensor that shows how's the plant getting light, how's the plant getting water, is the plant happy. But the kids code that in our platform. So they're building the sensor from scratch. They're feeling the plant. They're coding it to figure out those sensors. And really, there's like kind of a social and emotional part of it too. Or we have, obviously we have the Tinker bot, which is our bot. We have Tinker drones. We have different things like that. But I think some of the really cool ones are these things that really help kids think through things. We have one called a smart lamp that really really gets into this whole concept of how are we feeling, and that the company had a lot of success with. We have synthesizers that kids can build, things like that for music classes. So it's really a little bit of everything. And again, the idea is really to teach coding, um, but also, just teach how to solve problems. So it's really exciting. The team's amazing. It's just been 7 weeks, but I'm really excited about the impact it can have, and that's really, I started off as a teacher. It's kind of crazy to think that I'm a CEO of a company now. That wasn't on my dance card when I got out of college as an elementary school teacher, but yeah, it's really awesome. So it's exciting.
And that leads me right into my next question, Chad. Walk us through that journey. How did you go from elementary school teacher to a principal at some point to now CEO of TinkRworks?
I'll try to be. It's an interesting journey, but I'll try to kind of give you the Cliff Notes version. But I think the big thing is I've always just followed my passion, right? So I was a teacher. Um, I realized pretty early on I had a great mentor in my first principal, and she said, you could really be a principal, like you have leadership qualities. Again, my first thing was like, oh, I don't want to be a principal. That's, but then you think about, well, I could have an impact. I can go off from having an impact on this classroom to this school. You go to 1,000 kids. So I went and got my master's and I did that. And then, I realized then like, well, maybe I want to be a school superintendent. So I went and got my PhD, because you could have an impact on more kids, if you making good decisions. I never really did that job because the school I was at, we were doing a lot with technology. I was down in Clear Creek ISD, which is down by Johnson Space Center. So it's kind of ironic that I'm at TinkRworks. I always tell people we were a STEM school before there was STEM. Like we taught the astronauts kids and mission control, and NASA contractors, their kids were in our schools. And we're doing a lot with technology. The superintendent asked me to come in to do to come into the technology department and do some things. And next thing you know, I had a job offer to come do some consulting work at Dell, and did that for a few years. Realized that I really love like strategy and helping companies grow into this market. Moved up here to Chicago to work for CDWG as their like national strategist for education. Met a ton of cool people, and that's parlayed that into the job at Amazon Web Services, and then on over to Parent Square, where I was their chief strategy officer, where we did family engagement and really kind of cut my teeth on startups and EdTechs. And then and this opportunity came. So pretty crazy, but really like when I look back at it, like the common thread of all of it was really two things: really passion and impact. Jobs that would give big impact or things that I really enjoyed doing. And so, there was a lot of opportunities to become a CEO over the last 3 to 4 years. But, TinkRworks really provided this really nice, I was an elementary teacher. I was a teacher down near NASA. It has a tremendous ability to impact kids, and it kind of grew from there. So that's the short version.
And it's certainly carrying with you because I can see the astronaut and the rocket photographs behind you.
Yeah.
Any stories in that we should know? Is that you in that astronaut suit?
No. The one on the astronaut is Mike Massimino. I don't know if anybody watches The Big Bang Theory, but he's the astronaut that does a lot of, or used to do a lot of cameos on that show. Well, his kids went to my school when I was an assistant principal, and then later when I was a principal. And he's a really funny guy. Actually, I think he just wrote. I'll plug for Mike. He just wrote Moonshot, which I've been reading. I haven't talked to him in a while, but yeah, I had told him. He'd said, "Hey, when I'm going to get you a picture while I'm up there. Do you have any requests?" And he was up there doing a Hubble telescope repair. And he used to tell me or tell people, "Well, I'm just the Hubble telescope repairman." So like, and I said, "Yeah, if you get a chance, when you're doing your spacewalk, I want you to come to the window of the shuttle and do that and have him take a picture. And that's the picture I want. And that's exactly what that is. And so he signed it and sent it to me. And the other one is Frank Culbertson. I actually went to his launch. He was a parent at my school, and he was going up to live on the space station. He lived there almost a whole school year when one of his sons was in, I think, fifth grade. So yeah, was around that stuff a lot. So again, it's kind of fun to see this type of stuff come to fruition and to you know you know help future aeronautics students find their passion through TinkRworks.
Certainly. And I'm going to ask this next question selfishly with a 11-year-old and a 15-year-old. Help me understand as a parent how STEM, this exploration, TinkRworks is impacting kids. Like, a lot of us send our kids out to sports and they do sports, and then we kind of hammer them on their academics, and we kind of don't give them a lot of room to be curious. I'm just
Yeah.
speaking for myself, and I'd love to hear from your perspective. Walk me through that. What should my thinking be?
I mean, I think if you think about your career and what you do, I think a lot of all the things that we do are about experimenting and failure and learning and creativity. And a lot of us look for like the instruction manual on how to do stuff, right? And it's almost like our default is just to go like, well, how does this work? Or, how should we do this? I think in a great STEM environment, kids are learning obviously critical thinking and problem solving. They're also learning about, you know, careers they may like. And just as important as learning what they do like is learning what they don't like. Think about how many of us go into college. I've got one in college and a junior. So, you're paying for college if that's what they're doing, and you want them to get it right and choose something that they want to do. But like, I think there's a huge sports element in terms of teamwork. Um,
Mm.
you know, and it's really interesting because, you know, um, both my kids, loved athletics. I played athletics, but, from my principal lens, you also have to remember that there's like a whole world of kids that don't. But like, you think of like, um, the value of, like a debate sometimes, both my boys played football. People are like, well, that's so dangerous. I'm like, yeah, but you could never pay for the leadership skills of watching your kid play middle linebacker for a high school football team and like get 10 other guys lined up to do what they're supposed to do. Like, you can't buy that that
Yeah.
leadership. And in some extent, STEM, whether it's a robotic competition or something that happens in the classroom where you're working as a team to solve a problem, it provides that type of experience for kids that
Mm.
may not have that. And I think it's a really big deal. And then, I guess the last thing, the reality is that the rest of the world's doing this stuff, right? And so, and where this world's going with Chat GPT and AI and all these things, it's gonna impact, your job. So like, you think about, like, my son is a marketing major at University of Kentucky. And the last time he was home, I'm like, have you seen some of this stuff? Like, are you thinking about how you're going to use this? Because the people that use this stuff better in marketing are going to win. Um, and I think that's really what you think about, because your career's not going to go forever when it comes to athletics, as you know. So that'd be kind of, again, a few bullets off the top of my head. I think it's really awesome.
Well, speaking of AI, how do you see that, or how are you seeing that impact EdTech and in particular TinkRworks?
I think from the company standpoint, AI is really like driving a lot of efficiencies if you're using it the right way. So like, just the other day, I'll give a simple example. I pulled a bunch of data on schools in the United States, and I was kind of staring at this massive, just ugly spreadsheet that had all the data I needed to make some decisions, but none of the organization. And I just threw it up into ChatGPT and started asking it some questions, and it reconfigured the whole spreadsheet for me, and really without any lookup tables or anything else, and probably took maybe I'd say 6 to 8 hours of me being away from my job as a strategic person in the company, and made it down into like an hour and a half, and I had what I needed. I think that's one piece. Um, I think for companies, I think you have to be really thoughtful about it, right? When in the edtech world, when the AI first came out, when ChatGPT first came out, you started to see a lot of companies be like, well, we have AI in our product. But really, there wasn't a lot of talk about what are the privacy concerns and things like that you should be worried about with AI. I think you have to think about, you know, what's the why behind why you have an AI in your product, right? And
Mm,
for us, I my office is right by our awesome product team, and I'm watching them work on some new robots that are Python robots that potentially could have AI and ML built in. And the why would be, well, that's the way kids are going to have to learn how to code, in the future. So, our kids one day, going to code to be able to talk to the robot. So like, it's really weird to say that, so right now you're going, coding it, go right, go left, make a circle, pick up this, do this. But are you one day going to code it to then be able to go, hey, robot, go right. Hey, robot, go left. I think those are some things that, we're having to think about. And then, it really challenges the way you think about, how, what you have to do in the future.
mm.
As voice is really getting kind of interesting, right? As you can almost have a conversation with these things. So it's kind of scary.
It brings back my memories as a kid of doing programming, and it was, moving the cursor around the screen. It would be go to 4, turn left, go to, and repeat, and it would go around the screen. And but to your point, like, that taught me decision making and curiosity, and how can we break this to refix it? And it led into a whole slew of different opportunities.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So, but yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think schools are doing a really good job of embracing AI. There's been a lot more focus on it. And, I think a lot of disruptive technologies that are coming to schools in the past have kind of been stiff armed, um, if you will. But AI seems to be pretty well embraced right now in trying to do it. I think it's just how to do it, use it the right way, I think is really
Mm,
the challenge for everybody that works in education, because it has some pretty amazing ramifications for kind of the level of education that could happen at a school, or the level of things that we could teach a kid with our products.
certainly. So, Chad, if an audience member wants to get in touch with you, what's your social media platform of choice?
Well, if you want to learn more about TinkRworks, which I probably should do first since I'm the CEO, is it's just tinkerworks.com with a TINKR works.com, and we're at all the social media handles there. My personal X account is at K12CTO, so like at K12 Chief Technology Officer. And that's kind of where I am, and do a lot of I guess posting is the right word term now, not tweeting, about ed tech. Definitely a lot about sports, and just kind of like some of the stuff we talked about, habits, consistency. And kind of put a lot of that stuff out into the world as I'm reading it nowadays. So that's where I'm at. I think I'm actually K12 CTO on LinkedIn also. But those are kind of the two main platforms if you want to find me.
Awesome. And we'll put those in our show notes for anyone who wants to reach out. Well, Chad, I hope you do get a chance today to get that hour walk in, because I suspect, given the creativity that we've shared over this last 45 minutes, something brilliant is going to come out and impact your business and your personal life. I also loved our conversation around your experience with Amazon, and how we have a bias for action and how important speed is because we can learn from mistakes and continue forward. And then, of course, we started off our conversation around consistency, and we weave that through the entire conversation. So, audience members, if you got some value out of our show today, please like it, please subscribe, please share Chad's message with your community. Chad, again, it's been amazing having you on the show.
Thanks so much. It was really fun. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you for tuning in to the Chief Endurance Officer Podcast. To hear more inspiring stories and strategies around the endurance mindset, be sure to subscribe below or visit us at chiefenduranceofficer.com. Until next time, keep pushing those limits.